What does the average person need to consume if they want to perform well during exercise and they're doing over 60 minutes of strenuous, prolonged exercise? Well, we showed that just 10 grams per hour, the equivalent of a third of a banana. Okay.
Third of a
A
banana would
third
be 10 grams.
third of a banana is 10 grams, about a third of a small, medium size apple, a tablespoon of sugar, 10 grams. That is what was sufficient to maintain blood sugar levels and increase performance by 22%.
Tablespoon of
Um,
sugar, less than one piece of fruit. That's the rough amount we're talking about.
It is the amount that we're talking about that was able to sustain performance. Now, here's the open-ended question that has risen in the exercise science world in response to our work is, well, hold on. Well, you don't know that you didn't compare 10 grams to 60 grams or 90 grams to 120 grams. How do you know that you only need 10 grams? Well, this is based on 100 years of sports physiology that shows that even when people are consuming 60, 90 to 120 grams per hour, they're not even able to metabolize all of that during exercise based on the measurements and tools that we use. In fact, they would only be metabolizing about 30% of that. So why would you even consume 3 times that amount? Why would you consume 3 times the amount of what we actually measure and assess to show you're actually burning? That doesn't make sense, right, Nick? I mean, it doesn't to me. And so when thinking about, fueling, it aligns with the physiology, 100 years of evidence in physiology. Also, they have done dose response studies. And what you find is that there is a benefit to carbohydrates above zero, but not between the carbohydrate groups. You don't see this dose dependent improvement in performance, or dose response is what we call it in the scientific lingo, with higher levels of carbohydrates. So higher carbohydrates don't necessarily lead to better performance. In fact, there haven't
Yeah.
really been a lot of rigorous studies doing dose response studies.
So that, I guess that would fit with the idea that the key thing here is just avoiding hypoglycemia, maintaining blood sugar where it needs to be. Once you cross the threshold of whatever that is, more isn't better because you're already at where your blood sugar levels need to be.
Yes, and a really important clarifying point here, Nick, is that a lot of athletes will say, well, hold on, I perform way better when I have like 60 to 90 grams versus, just 10 grams. There's also a component of looking at your entire diet as well. If your entire diet is made up of predominantly carbohydrates and all of a sudden you just take away those carbohydrates, now you're in a caloric deficit. A caloric deficit is known to impair performance in many studies, right? So if you're keeping the calories neutral, we're talking about how you place them around exercise, because this actually has a pretty important effect. We talked about before, earlier on in the podcast, Nick, about the role that carbohydrates have in spiking insulin and also shutting down fat oxidation. Well, we see this in sports performance studies. One of the most common biomarkers associated with long-term performance in high-level athletes, endurance athletes particularly, is the amount of fat that you actually oxidize is associated with higher performers. Well, when you take a huge amount of carbohydrates, and this is a dose-dependent response, the more carbohydrates, the higher the insulin release based on all the physiology we talked about earlier. The higher the insulin, the more the fat is blocked from being broken down and utilized as a fuel. So you're actually paradoxically impairing this key substrate for your performance.
Right. So the higher and higher you go on the carb side, the more impaired you'll be in your ability to switch to fats in the moment if you were to need that.
Correct. And then what happens is the ultimate irony in that people consume, the sports nutrition industry has pushed high carbohydrate intake for athletes to quote unquote load muscle glycogen and spare muscle glycogen during exercise. Not only do you need to consume a ton of carbohydrates, but also you need to consume our gels, our sports drinks, our sugar waters,